Mr. Cole, don't announce that formula unless you want this entire deal to explode. The champagne glass slipped from Naomi Brooks's tray and shattered across the marble floor just as every investor in the ballroom turned toward her in stunned silence. At the center of the stage, beneath a 40-foot LED screen glowing with the words Cole Biotech Global Merger, billionaire Ethan Cole slowly lowered the microphone from his mouth and stared at the waitress who had just interrupted the most important night of his career. The room froze. Crystal chandeliers glimmered over black tuxedos and silver gowns while a string quartet near the ballroom entrance stopped playing mid-note. Naomi's chest rose sharply beneath the plain black server uniform that suddenly felt too small for the weight of what she had just done. $100 million in preliminary investor commitments sat on the line tonight. Reporters from CNBC and Bloomberg lined the back wall beside camera crews waiting for Ethan's historic announcement. And now a waitress with trembling hands and dark brown eyes had just publicly challenged the formula behind the deal. "Excuse me?" Ethan asked quietly, though the sharpness in his voice cut through the silence harder than a scream. Naomi swallowed. She could still smell it. That chemical trace hidden beneath the expensive wine and catered seafood drifting through the ballroom. Batch 47. The moment she uncorked the sample bottle upstairs in the private prep suite, her stomach had tightened instantly. The stabilization compound was wrong. Not completely wrong. Worse. Altered just enough to pass surface review. "Sir," she said carefully, fighting to steady her breathing, "the protein sequence in your live demo sample has been modified." Several investors exchanged confused looks. Someone near the back laughed softly under their breath. Ethan stepped down from the stage slowly, polished shoes clicking against the marble floor while security guards began moving toward Naomi from opposite sides of the room. "You work for the catering company," Victoria Hale said coldly from the front investor table. Her diamond bracelet flashed beneath the ballroom lights as she crossed her arms. "You are completely out of line." Naomi turned toward her instantly. That was the voice she had heard upstairs 15 minutes earlier behind the half-closed lab prep room door. Calm. Controlled. Nervous. "I heard you arguing about the formula samples," Naomi said. "And I smelled the solvent change myself." Victoria's expression hardened for less than a second before the corporate smile returned. "Mr. Cole," she said smoothly, "I strongly recommend we remove her before this turns into a scene." Ethan's jaw tightened. At 46 years old, Ethan Cole had spent 2 decades building one of the largest biotech companies in America. He had survived lawsuits, hostile takeovers, and federal audits without ever letting emotion disrupt business. But something about the waitress standing in front of him refused to fit the picture his mind wanted to create. Naomi didn't look reckless. She looked terrified for him. "What exactly are you accusing my company of?" Ethan asked. Naomi hesitated just long enough for the room to lean closer. "I think somebody altered the stabilization formula before tonight's presentation," she whispered. "And if investors approve this merger before testing the real batch," her voice cracked slightly, "people could get hurt." The ballroom erupted into whispers. Cameras immediately lifted. Security reached Naomi's side, but before either guard could touch her, Ethan suddenly raised one hand without taking his eyes off her face. "Wait." The room fell silent again. Naomi's fingers tightened around the edge of the broken serving tray, still trembling in her hands. Across the ballroom, Victoria Hale slowly slid her phone beneath the tablecloth and pressed delete on something hidden on the screen. The silence inside the ballroom lasted only 3 seconds before the whispers exploded like a wave crashing against glass walls. Investors leaned toward each other. Reporters raised their cameras higher. Someone near the stage muttered the word fraud loud enough for nearby tables to hear it. Naomi stood completely still between the security guards, while the broken shards of crystal around her shoes reflected the gold chandelier light across the marble floor. Ethan Cole did not move. His blue eyes stayed fixed on her face as if he were searching for the exact moment she would crack under pressure and admit this was all a misunderstanding. But Naomi did not look away. "Sir," one of the guards said carefully, "should we escort her out?" Victoria Hale stood from her chair before Ethan could answer. "Immediately," she said sharply. "This woman just interrupted a live investor presentation with accusations she cannot possibly understand." Naomi finally turned toward her. "I know what unstable protein binders smell like," she said quietly. Victoria laughed once, cold and polished. You are a waitress. I used to work in a university lab. That answer hit the room differently. Several investors stopped whispering. Ethan's expression shifted almost invisibly. Naomi Brooks, she continued, her voice steadier now. Columbia University biochemistry program. I left during my 3rd year. Victoria folded her arms tighter. And now you serve drinks at corporate events. That alone should tell everyone here how qualified you are. A few uncomfortable chuckles echoed from the investor tables, but Ethan did not laugh. Naomi lowered her eyes for half a second, then looked directly at him again. Batch 47 contains a synthetic stabilizer that should not react that strongly with ethanol vapor, she said. When I opened the sample upstairs, the smell was wrong immediately. Ethan's jaw tightened. She sounded too specific to be improvising. Around the ballroom, giant LED screens still displayed the merger presentation frozen on the Cole Biotech logo, while cameras remained pointed toward the unfolding disaster. Ethan finally stepped closer. How would you even know what my formula is supposed to smell like? Naomi hesitated. Because my mother participated in a clinical trial 8 years ago, she answered softly. The room quieted again. The company testing her medication manipulated stability data to speed approval. Nobody caught it until people got sick. Ethan's expression darkened slightly. Naomi continued before fear could stop her. She trusted people in suits who told her everything was safe. I watched what happened after. Victoria immediately stepped forward. This is emotional projection, not science, she snapped. Mr. Cole, every second this continues damages investor confidence. Ethan ignored her. What exactly are you saying? Naomi took a breath. I think someone modified the formula before tonight's presentation because the real numbers were not strong enough. The words landed like a punch to the center of the room. One investor slowly lowered his champagne glass. Another reached for his phone. Victoria's composure tightened visibly now, her perfect smile thinning at the edges. This is absurd, she said. Our internal testing passed every benchmark. Naomi looked directly at Ethan. Then test batch 47 again. Tonight. Before you sign anything tomorrow morning. Ethan stared at her for a long moment while the ballroom lights shimmered against the polished black stage behind him. Then his phone buzzed sharply in his pocket. He pulled it out. One new message flashed across the screen from Daniel Ross, the lead investor. We need to talk privately. Now. Ethan slowly lifted his eyes back toward Naomi, just as one of the servers near the champagne station suddenly dropped to one knee, coughing violently after tasting the biotech demonstration sample prepared for the investors upstairs. The coughing sound cut through the ballroom so suddenly that several guests stepped backward in alarm. The young server near the champagne station pressed one hand against his chest, while the silver tasting tray tipped sideways and clattered onto the marble floor. A thin layer of pale liquid spread across the polished stone beneath the glowing chandelier light. Ethan turned instantly. Get him water, someone shouted. 2 catering staff rushed forward while cameras swung wildly toward the disturbance. Naomi's stomach dropped. That sample came from the investor demonstration table, she said quickly. Victoria's face sharpened. Enough. Her voice cracked through the room with sudden force. This is turning into hysteria. But Ethan was already moving toward the collapsed tray. He crouched beside it, staring at the spilled liquid while the nervous server struggled to steady his breathing nearby. Did he drink much? Ethan asked. Only a sip, another employee answered quietly. Naomi stepped closer before security could stop her. Sir, please smell it now, she urged. Ethan looked up at her with visible irritation. You think I am going to identify chemical instability by smell? No, Naomi answered softly. I think you already know something feels wrong. That landed harder than she intended. Ethan slowly rose to his feet while the ballroom noise swelled around them again. Investors whispered into phones. Reporters moved closer to capture every second. Daniel Ross approached from the far side of the room, his expensive gray suit catching flashes from camera bulbs. Ethan, he said low enough to avoid the microphones, this situation is becoming a disaster. Ethan kept his eyes on Naomi. Tell me exactly what you think was changed. Victoria immediately stepped forward. This conversation should not continue publicly. Then stop interrupting it, Ethan said coldly, surprising even himself. The room quieted again. Naomi inhaled carefully. The original stabilization process probably used a lower synthetic binder percentage, she explained. But somebody boosted it to improve shelf performance numbers for investors. Daniel frowned. In English. Naomi nodded once. The formula looks more successful on paper than it really is. Victoria laughed sharply. This is unbelievable. A former college student is suddenly our lead scientist. Naomi's fingers tightened against the edge of her serving tray. I left school because my mother got sick, she said quietly. Not because I could not do the work. Ethan noticed the way she held eye contact when she said it. No shame. No performance. Just exhaustion layered over intelligence. Victoria opened her mouth again, but Ethan cut her off. What proof do you actually have? Naomi hesitated only a second before reaching into the pocket of her black apron. This. She pulled out her phone with trembling fingers and opened a blurry photograph. I took this upstairs after I heard your executives arguing. Ethan took the phone. The image showed a stainless steel prep counter inside the private laboratory. Suite above the ballroom. Several sample vials sat beneath bright fluorescent lighting beside an open laptop screen displaying chemical percentages. One number had been highlighted in red. Ethan's expression shifted slightly. Where did you get this? I was delivering wine to the prep room, Naomi answered. Nobody noticed me because I was carrying trays. Daniel leaned closer. Can you zoom in? Naomi did. The highlighted percentage became clearer now. Victoria's face lost color for the first time all night. Ethan looked at her slowly. Why is the binder percentage different from the FDA filing draft? For half a second Victoria said nothing. Then her polished smile returned too quickly. Because preliminary optimization changes are normal before public rollout. Naomi shook her head immediately. Not hours before a merger announcement. The ballroom seemed to shrink around them. Ethan stared at the screen in silence while his phone buzzed again and again with incoming investor alerts. Then from across the room, one of the hotel technicians suddenly called out in confusion. Sir, somebody just remotely wiped the upstairs lab server. The ballroom fell into a deeper kind of silence, the kind that arrives when panic replaces confusion, but no one wants to admit it out loud. Every eye turned toward the technician who had just spoken, standing near the side access door with a tablet in his hand. The entire lab server connection just reset remotely, he repeated, voice unsteady. All active files are gone from the internal dashboard. A wave of stunned murmurs spread instantly across the investor tables. Daniel Ross stepped forward, his expression tightening. That is not possible without executive clearance, he said sharply. Ethan's gaze remained locked on the technician. Can you recover it? He asked. The technician hesitated. Not without backup authorization keys. Victoria immediately cut in. This is exactly why uncontrolled interruptions like this are dangerous, she said, turning toward Ethan. We are in the middle of a live merger announcement, and now we are dealing with technical noise caused by panic from an unverified source. Her eyes briefly flicked toward Naomi. Naomi felt that look like a physical pressure, but she did not step back. It is not noise, she said quietly. Ethan turned his attention back to her. Explain. Naomi took a slow breath. If someone erased the server log, it means they wanted to remove traceability before anyone cross-checked batch 47 against the original formula. Daniel frowned. Why would anyone do that? Naomi looked directly at Victoria. Because the original formula does not match the public data sheet. A sharp silence followed. Victoria gave a controlled laugh. This is ridiculous. She is now claiming internal sabotage based on assumptions. Ethan raised a hand slightly, cutting her off without looking at her. Nobody speaks until I understand this fully, he said. Victoria stiffened. Naomi continued carefully. If the stabilization compound was altered to increase demonstration results, it would explain why the live sample upstairs reacted differently under exposure conditions. Ethan's jaw tightened. Different how? Naomi hesitated. Unstable binding under thermal variation. It would not show in controlled lab readings unless stress tested. Daniel exhaled slowly. You are saying the demonstration was engineered to look better than the actual product? Naomi nodded once. Yes. The word hung in the air heavier than anything said all night. Ethan slowly turned toward Victoria. Did you authorize any changes to the formula after FDA submission? Victoria's expression remained calm, but her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of her bracelet. Absolutely not, she said immediately. Any adjustments are handled by the research division under strict protocol. Naomi stepped forward one more time. Then why does your signature appear on the internal modification request log I saw in the prep room? That question shifted the entire atmosphere in the ballroom. Cameras clicked faster. Investors leaned in again. Victoria's eyes sharpened. You broke into restricted data? She said coldly. Naomi shook her head. I saw an open screen while delivering items. I did not access anything illegally. Ethan's voice dropped lower. What exactly did you see? Naomi answered. Without hesitation. Your approval attached to a last-minute adjustment increasing synthetic binder concentration by 0.07%. A low wave of reaction spread across the investors. Daniel turned slowly toward Victoria. Is that true? Victoria finally lost her composure for half a second. Even if minor adjustments were made, they are irrelevant without full context. Ethan stared at her now with a different expression, one she had not seen from him all evening. Not anger yet. Calculation. Lock the room, he said suddenly. Security immediately moved to secure all exits. No one leaves until we verify every system log from this building. Victoria's voice rose slightly. Ethan, this is becoming irrational. What is irrational? Ethan replied quietly. Is a multi-billion-dollar merger relying on data that just got erased minutes after someone raised a concern. The room went completely still again. Naomi stood in the center of it all, her hands trembling now but her voice steady. Sir, she said softly, if batch 47 goes forward without correction, the instability will not show during presentation conditions. It will only appear under real-world application stress. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then his phone vibrated again in his hand. One new message lit up the screen from an unknown internal account. Stop the deal. You are being watched. The message on Ethan Cole's phone did not disappear, even as he locked the screen and reopened it again as if expecting it to vanish. Stop the deal. You are being watched. The words remained unchanged, cold and precise, with no sender identity attached. Around him, the ballroom still looked intact on the surface, but the energy inside had shifted completely. Investors were no longer speaking loudly. They were watching him instead. Naomi stood a few steps away, still holding the broken serving tray, her eyes fixed on Ethan as if she already understood what the message meant before he did. Daniel Ross leaned in slightly. That is not an internal system message, he said quietly. That looks external. Victoria immediately stepped forward again, her voice sharper now, less controlled than before. This is exactly how misinformation spreads in high-value negotiations. Anonymous messages, emotional interference, and unqualified assumptions. Ethan did not respond to her. He kept staring at his phone. Then another notification appeared. Same sender. Check the rooftop lab access log. Ethan's eyes lifted instantly. Where is the rooftop laboratory access terminal? He asked. A staff member near the sidewall raised a hand nervously. Service elevator B leads to the upper research floor and rooftop lab interface, sir. Ethan did not hesitate. I want access now. Victoria moved in front of him. You are not seriously going to halt a live merger based on anonymous messages from an unknown source and a waitress's interpretation of chemical data. Ethan finally looked directly at her. A server just wiped our internal logs, he said. And now someone who knows internal architecture is telling me to check the rooftop access system. The tone in his voice made Victoria pause for the first time. Naomi stepped forward slightly. The rooftop lab is not just storage, she said carefully. It is where final batch validation is run before investor demonstration. Ethan turned toward her. How do you know that? Naomi hesitated. Because I cleaned that floor during my internship rotation years ago. A brief silence followed that admission. Not disbelief. Reassessment. Ethan turned toward Daniel. Stay here and keep everyone contained, he ordered. Daniel nodded once. If something is wrong, we need containment before exposure. Ethan began walking immediately toward the service corridor. Naomi followed without being asked. Victoria's voice rose behind them. This is a mistake. You are letting an emotional narrative override corporate procedure. Ethan stopped for a second but did not turn around. If you are right, he said calmly, we lose money. If she is right, people lose trust in science. Then he continued walking. The service elevator doors opened with a soft mechanical sound. The interior lighting was dim compared to the ballroom glow below. Naomi stood beside Ethan as the doors closed. For a few seconds neither of them spoke. The elevator began to rise. Floor. Indicators moved upward one number at a time. Ethan finally broke the silence. Why didn't you walk away when security tried to remove you earlier? He asked. Naomi looked straight ahead. Because I have seen what happens when data is ignored, because the messenger looks wrong. Ethan studied her face for a moment. You are saying you have seen this before. Naomi nodded slightly. In a hospital report that did not match what my mother was actually experiencing. The elevator slowed. Rooftop level. The doors opened into a dim corridor lined with glass panels and industrial lighting. A faint alarm indicator was blinking red near the far end. Ethan stepped out first. Naomi followed closely. The corridor led to a secured lab door that was slightly ajar. A cold draft came from inside. Ethan pushed the door open fully. Inside, multiple computer stations were still active, but the main display screen showed a single line of text. System reset complete. All previous data archived or cleared. Ethan stood still for a moment, then slowly turned toward Naomi. This was done less than 10 minutes ago, he said quietly. Naomi stepped closer to the screen. Her face tightened slightly as she noticed something on the reflection of the glass panel behind it. A faint login timestamp. It belonged to someone with executive access. And it was still active. The rooftop laboratory felt colder than anything inside the building below, not because of temperature, but because of silence that no longer felt natural. Ethan Cole stood motionless in front of the main terminal screen, watching the blinking cursor where critical system data should have been. Naomi Brooks moved closer to the glass panel, her eyes narrowing as she studied the faint reflection of access logs still partially cached in the secondary display buffer. It is not fully erased, she said quietly. Ethan turned immediately. What do you mean? Naomi pointed at the corner of the screen where a single line of encrypted metadata flickered intermittently. There is a temporary mirror log. It was not cleaned properly. Ethan stepped closer, his voice tightening. Can you read it? Naomi hesitated, then nodded. Yes, but it will take a few seconds to decode. Behind them, the rooftop ventilation system hummed softly, the only sound breaking the stillness. Ethan checked his phone again. No new messages. No alerts from his internal security team. That absence was worse than noise. Naomi worked quickly, tapping through the interface with steady but controlled movements. Her hands no longer shook. The focus had replaced fear. This access timestamp, she said. It shows an executive login 10 minutes before the server wipe. Ethan leaned in. Who? Naomi paused for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. It is linked to the internal approval chain under your executive tier. Ethan frowned. That could still be multiple people. Naomi looked up at him. It is not multiple. She rotated the screen slightly, so he could see the last authentication signature. Ethan's expression changed instantly. The name field had been partially masked by the system, but the identifier prefix was still visible. VH. Ethan stepped back slightly as if the letters had physical weight. Victoria Hale, he said under his breath. Naomi said nothing. The confirmation was already written in her silence. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Ethan slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone again. He opened the internal executive directory. Victoria Hale's credentials showed full administrative clearance over laboratory data systems. Naomi exhaled slowly. If she had access, she could modify both the formula and the logs, she said carefully. Ethan stared at the screen. That means she did not just alter a batch, he said quietly. She controlled the entire presentation pipeline. Naomi nodded once. And the investor demonstration downstairs was built on that pipeline. A distant vibration suddenly echoed through the rooftop corridor. Ethan looked toward the entrance. A second later, Daniel Ross appeared at the doorway, slightly out of breath. "We have a situation downstairs," Daniel said quickly. "Victoria is attempting to proceed with the merger announcement without you." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Did she override the containment order?" Daniel hesitated. "She is telling the board that you are compromised by external influence." Naomi looked at Ethan. "She is trying to finalize before you return." Ethan turned back toward the terminal screen one last time. The blinking log still showed the same timestamp. Executive override confirmed. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again with a steady resolve. "We go back down," he said. Naomi followed immediately. Daniel stepped aside as they moved toward the elevator. As the doors closed, Ethan spoke without looking at either of them. "If she controls the system, she controls the deal." Naomi responded softly. "Then we stop the deal before it becomes irreversible." The elevator began descending. Floor numbers changed rapidly. Somewhere below, the ballroom lights still glittered, unaware that the foundation of everything had already shifted. The elevator doors opened with a soft mechanical chime, but the sound felt distant compared to the tension pressing through the corridor. Ethan Cole stepped out first, his expression locked in a controlled calm that no longer matched the chaos unfolding beneath the surface of the building. Naomi Brooks followed closely behind him, her eyes focused forward, while Daniel Ross moved in from the side as if trying to anticipate what would happen next. The three of them entered the descending hallway leading back toward the ballroom level, where the final investor announcement was still scheduled to continue. As they approached the main doors, faint sounds of applause drifted through the walls, signaling that Victoria Hale had already taken control of the stage. "She started without you," Daniel said quietly. Ethan did not respond immediately. His hand rested briefly on the door handle, then paused. "She is not just starting," Naomi said softly. "She is closing it." Ethan looked at her. "How do you know?" Naomi hesitated. "Because if she believes she has full system authority, she will try to finalize investor signatures before anyone can verify the data breach." Ethan's jaw tightened. Then he pushed the doors open. The ballroom was brighter than before, as if nothing had changed. Investors were seated, cameras were active, and the large screen behind the stage now displayed the final merger approval contract. Victoria stood at the podium, perfectly composed, her voice smooth and confident as she addressed the room. After extensive review and alignment across all departments, she said, "We are prepared to proceed with final authorization." Applause began to build again, controlled and polite. But it was not genuine relief. It was anticipation. Ethan entered the room slowly, and the applause faded slightly as people noticed him. Victoria's eyes shifted toward him for a fraction of a second, but her smile did not break. "Ethan," she said warmly, "we were just about to finalize." Ethan walked forward without rushing. Naomi and Daniel followed behind him. "Stop the announcement," Ethan said clearly. The room fell into confusion. Victoria tilted her head slightly. "We are already in final execution phase. Any delay now would create irreversible market disruption." Ethan stopped near the front row. "There will be a delay," he said. Victoria's smile tightened. "On what grounds?" Ethan turned slightly. Naomi stepped forward. The entire ballroom focused on her instantly. Cameras adjusted. Investors leaned forward again. Naomi felt the weight of every gaze, but her voice remained steady. "On the grounds that the formula data being used for this merger has been modified without authorization," she said. A ripple of disbelief moved through the room. Victoria let out a soft laugh. "This is becoming repetitive," she said. "A waitress repeating technical phrases she does not understand does not constitute evidence." Naomi did not react. Ethan looked at Victoria now directly. "The rooftop server logs were wiped," he said. "But the access mirror still shows executive override credentials." Victoria's expression changed slightly. Not fear. Control. "And you believe this proves misconduct?" she asked. Ethan nodded once. "It proves access," he said. "And access explains modification capability." The investors began whispering again. Daniel stepped forward. We can pause finalization for 30 minutes, he said. Just to validate system integrity. Victoria turned toward him sharply. If we pause, the market reacts instantly. We lose leverage. Ethan's voice lowered. We already lost leverage the moment the system data was erased. A silence fell over the room again, heavier this time. Victoria looked around at the investors, then back at Ethan. You are allowing external influence to override executive governance, she said. Naomi finally spoke again. This is not external influence, she said. This is correction. Victoria stared at her for a long moment, then slowly reached for the control panel at the podium. Then let us settle it properly, she said calmly. We proceed to final vote. Ethan stepped forward immediately. No, he said. Victoria paused. Excuse me. Ethan's voice was firm now. We will not proceed until the original formula is restored and verified. Cameras zoomed in tighter. Investors began murmuring louder. Daniel looked between them, realizing the moment had fully shifted beyond negotiation. Naomi stood still beside Ethan, her heart pounding but her expression steady. Victoria leaned slightly toward the microphone. Then I am afraid, she said quietly, you are shutting down your own company. The ballroom no longer felt like a place built for celebration. It felt like a sealed chamber where every breath carried consequence. Victoria Hale stood at the podium with her hand resting lightly on the control panel, her posture still perfect, but her eyes now sharper, more defensive. The silence after Ethan Cole's refusal stretched across the room like a tightening wire. Investors shifted uneasily in their seats. Cameras remained fixed, capturing every second of the unraveling deal. Ethan stepped forward one more time. We are not proceeding with any vote until full system verification is complete, he said clearly. Victoria tilted her head slightly. And if I refuse? She asked. Ethan did not blink. Then the meeting is over. A wave of murmurs spread instantly through the ballroom. Daniel Ross lowered his voice. Ethan, if we shut this down publicly, the stock will collapse before sunrise. Ethan kept his gaze forward. If we proceed with corrupted data, it collapses anyway, he said. Naomi stood just behind him, her hands now steady. She was no longer simply reacting. She was watching Victoria closely, noticing the subtle tension in her expression. Victoria exhaled slowly, then turned toward the investors. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, her tone shifting back to polished confidence. What you are witnessing is an emotional disruption caused by an unverified external consultant. She gestured lightly toward Naomi, a waitress with no clearance attempting to interfere in a regulated financial merger. A few investors exchanged uneasy looks again. Naomi stepped forward slightly. I am not interfering, she said calmly. I am identifying a modification that was made to your core formula after regulatory submission. Victoria's smile returned, but it no longer reached her eyes. And you expect this room to accept that claim without proof? She asked. Ethan raised his hand slightly. We already have partial proof, he said. We have access logs. We have a wipe server. We have an executive authentication signature tied to unauthorized changes. Victoria turned slowly toward him. Then show it, she said. Ethan paused. Daniel stepped in immediately. We can project the log mirror from the rooftop cache, he said quickly. It is still partially intact. A technician near the stage nodded nervously and began connecting the system to the main screen. The giant display behind the podium flickered once. Then the rooftop access log appeared in full view of the entire ballroom. The timestamp sequence scrolled across the screen. Executive login detected. Modification request approved. Batch 47 adjustment initiated. Then the identifier appeared again. The room reacted instantly. A low wave of shock moved through the investors. Victoria froze for half a second, her composure slipping just slightly before she forced it back into place. This is manipulated data, she said quickly. Ethan turned toward her. It is your credential, he said quietly. Victoria stepped forward. Credentials can be cloned. You of all people should know that. Naomi shook her head slightly. This is not a clone, she said. It is a direct system authentication path tied to your executive device. Victoria's breathing tightened almost imperceptibly. Daniel leaned toward Ethan. If this is confirmed, we have full liability exposure. Ethan did not respond immediately. He was watching Victoria now with complete focus, as if evaluating every decision she had made leading to this moment. Why did you do it? He asked quietly. The question cut through the room more than any accusation. Victoria's eyes hardened. I built the stabilization framework for this company, she said. I ensured investor confidence. I ensured survival. Naomi stepped forward again. At the cost of safety validation, she said. Victoria turned sharply toward her. You do not understand what happens in high-level biotech markets, she said. If results are not strong enough, funding disappears. Research dies. Ethan took a slow step forward. And you decided to change reality instead of fixing it, he said. Silence returned again. Cameras zoomed in on Victoria's face. Investors waited for her response. But for the first time she did not have a clean answer. Daniel finally spoke into the silence. We need to terminate the merger vote immediately. Ethan nodded once. Agreed. Victoria's hand tightened on the podium edge. You are making a catastrophic business decision, she said quietly. Ethan looked at her one last time. No, he replied. I am making a human one. The ballroom remained frozen as the system display behind them continued to show the altered logs, confirming what could no longer be ignored. The ballroom remained suspended in a fragile silence, as if the entire room was waiting for a final breath before reality settled. The giant screen behind the podium still displayed the corrupted log data. The executive identifier frozen in place like an irreversible signature. Victoria Hale stood motionless for the first time all evening, her composure no longer performing confidence but attempting to hold it together. Ethan Cole looked at the investors, then at the screen, then finally at Naomi Brooks standing just beside him. There was no more doubt in his expression, only clarity shaped by consequence. The merger vote is terminated, Ethan said calmly. The words landed without drama, but the effect was immediate. A wave of whispered. Reactions moved across the room, phones lifted, financial advisors already calculating the impact in real time. Victoria turned slowly toward him. You are destroying 10 years of research in one sentence, she said quietly. Ethan did not raise his voice. I am stopping it from becoming a liability to human safety. Naomi remained still, but her breathing softened slightly, as if she had been holding it in for hours. Daniel Ross stepped forward. We will initiate internal audit protocols immediately, he said, addressing both investors and legal observers present. All final approvals are suspended pending full forensic review. A few investors stood up, already preparing to leave the room, their expressions split between frustration and uncertainty. Victoria finally stepped down from the podium. For the first time, her posture did not look controlled. It looked weighed down. Do you understand what this will do to the company? She asked Ethan. Ethan met her eyes directly. Do you understand what it would have done if we had not stopped it? He replied. Silence returned, heavier than before. Naomi looked at Ethan now, and her voice was quieter than everything else in the room. It was not just the formula, she said. Ethan turned toward her. Explain. Naomi hesitated briefly, then continued. It was the direction. The adjustment was not only to improve performance metrics. It shifted biological response behavior in a way that was never approved for public distribution. Daniel frowned immediately. You are saying it changed functional outcome? Naomi nodded. Yes. It would have passed investor demonstration standards, but failed real-world safety thresholds. That sentence changed the atmosphere completely. Even those who had been skeptical stopped moving. Ethan slowly exhaled. That means, he said, this was not a mistake. Naomi looked at him. No, she said. It was intentional. Victoria's expression tightened instantly. That is an accusation without evidence, she said quickly. Naomi turned slightly toward her. The evidence is already in the system logs you tried to erase, she replied. A technician near the stage confirmed quietly. We are still recovering fragments from the mirrored backup. The pattern matches manual override sequences. Daniel stepped closer to Ethan. If this holds, we are looking at full regulatory investigation, he said. Ethan nodded once. Then we cooperate fully, he said. Victoria looked around the room, seeing the shift in control now fully gone. The investors were no longer focused on returns or timelines. They were focused on truth. She stepped back slightly. You are all making a mistake, she said softly, but no one responded. Ethan turned toward Naomi one last time. You were right to stop this, he said quietly. Naomi did not answer immediately. She simply looked at the screen where the corrupted logs still remained visible. Then she spoke. I did not stop it, she said. I only made sure it could not continue unnoticed. For a moment no one moved. Then Ethan finally nodded. The decision was already made. The ballroom lights remained bright, but the deal that had once filled the room with ambition had now dissolved into silence, accountability, and irreversible truth.